Greetings, welcome back to Hebrew. We are moving quickly through the different verbal stems. As you can see at this point, last video we covered the nifal, and this time it looks probably incredibly, this looks like a lot of information here to cover. The Piel, the Pual, and the Hithpael. I have great news for you. All three of these are related. They're closely related stems. The Piel is an active stem, kind of like the call. And just like the nifal was the reflexive form of the call, the pual, it has that U vowel in there in the middle of the verb there, pual, that is actually the reflexive form or the passive form of the piel. So they're actually very closely related. In fact, the pual is very uncommon, and don't worry, I will not actually quiz you on the pual. But it's important for you to know that it exists so that if you encounter it in a biblical text, then you'll know that it's a possibility. You'll know what to do. These do exist in the Bible. They're just very rare. The Hithpael is more common than the Pual, but it is an interesting kind of combination form, and we'll get to that later. But the main thing to focus on for this class is the Piel, and the second most important thing is the Hithpael forms. So again, these are stems, right? These are patterns or stems that we can that can add particular meanings to roots. These are verbal forms, right? So these only occur in verbs. So the call is a Hebrew word that means nothing added to it, unencumbered, light. So it's just kind of plain is another way to think about it. Nothing extra added to it. It just means what the root of the word means. And today we'll be looking at the Piel, which is another active stem. You can also see Hithpael there on the side. Hithpael is another active stem. It's an active verb just like the call, but it adds this a little bit of extra meaning to it. So we'll get to what the particular meaning of the Piel is today. We'll move on to the Hithpael next time. So then we'll have covered most of the stems in Hebrew by next week. Each of these active stems, the call, the Piel, and the Hithpael, each have a reflexive or passive form. The passive form of the call is the nifal. As we said, there's like this very strange call passive, a very ancient form of the verb that really only exists in participle forms that has that kind of U vowel stuck in the middle of the call. But again, that's rare except for in participle forms. But at this point, in biblical Hebrew, in classical biblical Hebrew, the nifal it has taken over. It's become the reflexive or passive form of the call. The reflexive or passive form of the Piel is the Pual, and the reflexive or passive form of the Hithpael is the Hithpael. Don't worry about the Hithpael and the Hithpael yet. Those just exist. We'll get to them later. And then there's this really interesting and strange root called the Hithpael. It has a hit stuck onto the front of a verb. It is a strange one. We're going to cover it today because it is basically a strange version of the Piel. So in any event, we'll again cover that. But these are the major stems of Hebrew. Once you've learned these, you're pretty much done. There's one last week or one last session where we'll talk about some just strange, rare verbal forms. They call it in Kutz and Joesberger, and they really are rare. Just to show you the incidence of these verbs, the frequency of these verbs in the Bible, call verbs are about 70% of the Bible. So if you are pretty good with call verbs, you can pretty much read most of the Hebrew Bible. Of course, a lot of sentences have a few verbs in them. So let's say you have 2 or 3 verses in Hebrew. You're going to run across one of these other verbal forms at some point or another. The nifal, which we learned last session, is about 5.6%. Let's round that up. About 6% of verbs are in the nifal. The Piel, which we'll be talking about today, is almost 10% of verbs in the Bible. And the Pual is less than 1%. That reflexive or passive form of the Piel. So just to say, the Pual is not very common. You can also see we're going to be learning the Hithpael. That's 1.6%, or if you round it up, about 2% of verbs in the Bible. There at the top. That is another one we'll be talking about today. So you'll come across, if you translate 100 verbs in Hebrew, you're going to run across two Hithpaels. These are not, of course, equally distributed throughout the Bible, so some stories end up having a lot of one form or another. But all to say, if you're going to prioritize learning these, learn the Piel. And then the Pual, just figure those out when you come to them. Know where to go. Maybe you can recognize some of the major signs of the Pual from the grammar and from this video, but that's all we're going to ask of you. And the Hithpael, I'm going to show you some ways that you're definitely going to recognize it. It has a distinctive front or beginning to this verb, but also this is something you might just want to look up. You might want to find the root and then look it up in the dictionary, and then find out what form you're looking at later. So just remember, stems add some kind of meaning to the root, except for the call, which adds no meaning to the root. Call means no extra meaning added. The Piel, what we're going to learn today, adds what some people call factative or intensive is another way to say this, meaning those are maybe kind of two different categories. It's the Piel can do some different stuff. This is why Coutts and Joesberger tell you to cause a state of being. That's kind of what factative means. And then they say, second, look it up. Just look it up in the dictionary to see what the Piel means, because particular verbs can mean very different things when they're in the Piel, very distinctive things. One verb that I can just think of off the top of my head, the verb chashav, which means to reckon or to kind of understand something, to make sense of something. If it's in the Piel, it really means to misunderstand something. So you wouldn't be able to get that by just knowing that the Piel causes a state or something. And so that's why they say look it up. Just look them up. If the verb makes sense in this kind of causative state, and we'll get to what causative state means. Or I'm going to add something to the grammar, and that's in this intensive meaning. If it can mean something intensively, then maybe that's what it means in that position. But if those two don't make sense, then just don't hesitate to just go look it up in the dictionary. So we've got some online dictionary tools on Moodle. The two-letter lookup, which is there are a bunch of links, kind of resource links underneath the office hours links on Moodle, and you can find that there. You can also look these up. If you find the root, you can look it up in the BDB, and the BDB will tell you what the PL means for each verbal root. So we're going to talk about this factative or cause a state of being, is what Coutts and Joesberger say. What does it mean to cause a state of, that a verb would be about causing a state of being, or that it would be factative? Okay, here's what it means. Can you form a verb from an adjective? So the adjective dear, like someone who is dear to me, or if I start a letter, Dear Brennan, right? That dear is actually an adjective there. It's describing someone. You are my dear. Is what that means. You are dear to me. So how do we make a verb out of that? How about to dear doesn't work, but what about to make dear, to endear, to endear myself to someone? So I would use that word like this. I have endeared myself to my faculty colleagues by doing some work for them, etc. I've made them, think of me as a dear, as someone who's dear to them. Okay, so another way to think about this is enlarge. So large is the adjective, right? A large building or something. But how do you make something large? You enlarge, right? I have enlarged my building. Or sensitive is an adjective. Say I'm a sensitive person, but how do you say make sensitive? That would be sensitize, right? So here this is a suffix in English that can be factative or cause a state of being. Another one would be an adjective real, right? You are real to me, or this situation has become real to me. That's an adjective, but to make real would be the verb, right? And how do we say that? We say realize. Like I have realized, which means it has become real to me. It seems real to me now. So another question is, can you take a noun and turn it into a verb? Can you verbify a noun, in other words? Well, in fact, you can. So the noun rage, right? Like anger, right? To be rage or something like that, we would say enrage, like to become full of rage would be to enrage someone, right? Or how about code, right? To make code, to encode, right? Or a magnet, a noun of a magnet. How do you verbify that? How do you turn that into a verb? What about magnetize, right? I have magnetized this, right? So it's about causing that state of being, or it's about turning something into a magnet. turning something into code, turning something into someone into a person who is full of rage, right? That's enraging. So a terror, right? How you fill someone with terror, you terrorize them, right? Or and so on. So you can take these roots, right? These simple roots, and then you can add them, put them into the Piel, which adds this meaning of quite often. Of course, there are exceptions. There's some look it up, roots with the Piel, but a lot of the time, what the Piel does is it takes a basic state and it turns that state into a verb in which the verb describes how that came about. So again, the adjective large, enlarge, right? To make something large. So to make something. This is why it's called in grammatical terms factative, like you turn something into that fact, you turn something into that noun, or Coutts and Josberger have a great way of putting it, that cause a state of being, right? To turn something into a large building, to enlarge, right? So the Piel markers, the markers of the Piel, may function similarly to like the en prefix and the ize prefix in English, like enlarge or energize, right? Add energy to someone, to energize them. So let's do some examples here. So these you see on the left, three Hebrew roots, tahar, yara, and kadash. So the root tahar, or really taher, means in the call to be clean. This is a stative verb. It's about like possessing a state, right? Being something. Taher means to be clean. In the Piel, remember we're going to add like ize, right? To be cleansed or something. To cleanse, right? To cleansify, right? To make clean. So the Piel, so if you see this verb, taher, in the call, it would mean to be clean. If you see it in Piel, it would be to make clean. So to make pure. This is what you see in the book of Leviticus. This word occurs a lot. And when it occurs in the call, it's describing something as clean, like animals with certain configurations of hooves and feet are clean, right? But then when you see this verb in the Piel, it's going to be about cleansing, making something clean. How do you purify, right, a space that has been rendered impure by, let's say, a dead body or something, right? So that's about cleanse, to make clean. So this next example, yara, is to be afraid, to fear, right? To be afraid. So what if we see this one in the Piel? Then it wouldn't be to be afraid, it would be to make afraid, or terrify, or scare. There's a lot of English words that could translate this, right? But that putting fear into someone. Or how about this one? Kadash, to be holy, right? Kodesh is another word that we've learned that has to do with holiness. If this is a verb in the call, if this root is in the call, it means to be holy. It gives us a state, right? So if we're going to say it's in the Piel, then it wouldn't be to be holy, it would be to make holy. Or consecrate, which means to make something holy, right? To set aside something as holy as the act of consecration. You could also say make holy. You could translate that in English as to make holy, or to cause to be holy. That's fine. But that's going to be, it's better to find a single word to try to represent that. And in English, we do have this verb, even if it doesn't look like the verb holy. It's a different English word, but it means to make holy. So again, we use the word factative to talk about this, like to make into a fact. But you'll see this in other grammars and in some commentaries and things when they talk about the Piel being a factative stem. But I do like Coutts and Josberger's cause a state of being. That's what they say on page 239, to cause a state of being. It's a good way of putting it. There's another meaning of the Piel that I find really helpful to explain to you, even if Coutts and Josberger say the second one is look it up. There's another one that I think is really, really important, and that's called intensive or frequentative. Sometimes in the call, a root will mean something, but then in the Piel, that same root will mean to do it a lot, or to do it very hard, or to do it intensively, right? So shavar in the call means to break something, like to shatter a vase or something like that, or to shatter a bowl. You use that verb shavar. If that occurs in the Piel, it would mean to shatter, to really break, to smash to pieces or something like that. Sha'al is a root in Hebrew that means to ask. In the Piel, that would be like to ask a lot, or to beg, right? To plead, something like that. The verb kavar means to bury, like to bury a relative, or to dig a grave for someone, to bury someone, to attend to their body at the time of death. That's kavar. In the Piel, what would that be, like to really bury them or something? Well, it might be actually to bury lots of people. So if the verb kavar, the root kavar, shows up in the Piel, That means to intensively or frequentatively dig a lot of graves or something. So in any event, I'll just say that this can be like one intensive action, or it can mean doing the action over and over lots of times. That's more rare. More often, it's like doing the thing a lot. But to say this is the a less common meaning than that factative meaning, or the to cause a state meaning. There's another meaning that is less common, but really it's kind of like it is pretty much factative. It's that cause a state of being, but it's a little bit different in grammatical terms. You'll sometimes see grammars kind of single this one out, or some commentaries will refer in the Piel. This is the denominative form. What that means is that it's a noun that you made into a verb. When you verbify a noun, that's what the grammatical word you use to describe that is denominative. So kahan, or you've learned kohen, right? That's a priest, right? The root kof he nun. It's kaf, I'm sorry, I said kof. Kaf he nun means priest, right? That's kind of the basic root to be a priest or something like that. In the Piel, that would be like to act as a priest, to do the priestly things. Or sharash, which means a root. It's actually shoresh when you see this in the Bible. But yeah, so shoresh means a root. In the Piel, that means like to uproot, to do something with a root, like to see the full root. You got to take it out of the ground, so that it ends up meaning uproot in the Piel. Or afar, well, that now means dust. In the Piel, it means like to make a lot of dust happen. So to like throw the dust around, or to create a dust, to kick up dust. It might be another way to translate this. So all to say, you don't need to memorize this. It's easiest just to look these up, when they occur. If you're like, I know that word shoresh means root, but I don't know what it means in the Piel. What in the world is it trying to get me to think about here? Well, you can just look it up in the dictionary. That's why the BDB exists. But also that 2-letter lookup dictionary resource that's on Moodle. And another thing, when you memorize these verbs, sometimes for your vocabulary lists, sometimes we've started to, and the Kutz and Josberger have started to introduce the Piel as having particular meanings, and that's why they're doing it, because it actually has some distinctive meanings in the Piel you might not be able to just guess. A last potential meaning for this, declarative. This is pretty much factative. This is pretty much the same thing, but just to say, some grammars will pull this out very distinctively. Like the verb nakah means to, like an innocent person, would be like an innocent man, let's say, would be ish nakah, right? An innocent man. But if you see this in the Piel in a verbal form, the same root, it would be to make sure everyone knows that someone is innocent, or have a judge declare you, or God declare you innocent. Or tzedek, right? Righteous, a righteous person, right? Or like a righteous God, right? Elohim tzedek. If you want to say declare, if you put this in the Piel in a verbal form, it would be to declare someone righteous, like God declares, you righteous. That would be tzedek, God declared righteous in the Piel form. So, in any event, those are some potential meanings. So, summary of these meanings. Many of them actually can be like the third and fourth on this list, denominative and declarative. You can make those kind of subsets of the factative, right? They're turning in something in, or kind of making sure that everyone knows that something is it has a certain state. And then that second one, intensive frequentative, to really do something hard or a lot. That is another major potential meaning of the Piel. So that's how it works, right? That's the extra layer of meaning that the Piel adds to verbs. Now, the Piel can also show up in all these different aspects, right? Like perfect or imperfect, or it can show up in an expression of will. It can show up in an imperative form, let's say, or it can show up, in an infinitive form or in a participle. So we're going to run through the different ways that the Piel shows up in these forms, and you don't have to memorize all of these, but I'm going to give you some ways to kind of hang your hat, like some clues, right, for you to know that this is a Piel. Now, good thing for you to know is that the Piel perfect or the Piel imperfect, right, has the same prefixes and suffixes, or preformatives and subformatives, that you find in the call forms of this verb. All of the imperfects have the same beginnings. All of the perfects have the same endings in all of these different stems. So you don't have to relearn that. What you have to relearn is the particular markers of the Piel. And just remember, these are our affirmatives, or really here, suffirmatives, endings of the perfect. Remember, zipatata ti utem tenu? Well, good thing that it's the call perfect and the Hithpael perfect and the Piel perfect. This works for all of them. And for the Hithpael perfect. And for, every single stem that we're going to learn has these exact same suffirmatives. So what do we do to make the Piel perfect? Well, let's say the first marker of the Piel perfect is that there is a doubling of the middle radical. Remember, there's 3 radicals in each Hebrew root. The middle radical in the Piel is doubled. This is distinctive for all Piel forms. Sometimes people call Piel the D stem or the double stem because it doubles the middle radical of all of its forms. Sometimes you'll even see, like in a grammar or in a commentary, they'll say this is the D stem. That's what they mean, the double stem. The Piel was what we used to talk about this. But in any event, you can see here that doubling of the middle radical is distinctive for the Piel. There's another marker of the Piel perfect. This is, again, the Piel perfect has this marker. That doubling is distinctive for all Piel forms, but the Hirek under the first radical is distinctive for the Piel perfect. So again, marker of the Piel, marker of the Piel perfect is when you have the perfect endings, zipatata ti utem tenu, and an I-class vowel under your first radical, and that distinctive Piel marker, the doubling of the middle radical. There you go. So here's an example that's all fleshed out. This is our root gadol, which means big. So if we think of this factatively, or to cause a state, then this would be to make big or enlarge, right? So gidel up there, the third masculine singular. Notice we have our gimel. That gimel looks like it has it has a dagesh in it, but that's not a doubling dagesh. That's just because it's a gimel, right? It's part of the bagad kafat letters. So this is just, it starts the word, so it's hard. It's a stop. So that's why it's there. But that dalet in the call perfect, let's say, wouldn't be there. But here it is doubling that middle radical because it's in the Piel, and we have an I-class vowel underneath our first radical. Remember for the call perfect, remember we had an A-class radical under our first vowel, like shamar, shamarti, right? Shamarta. So you have this A-class vowels underneath everything. Here you have an I-class vowel under your first radical and a doubling of the second radical, and that's our sign for the Piel perfect. So to see that 3ms form, gidel, up top left, so that would be he, and this is in the perfect, so it's kind of past tense. It's how we usually translate it in English, right? Completed action. He enlarged. Or on the top right, that third common plural, gidelu, that would be they enlarged, right? They made large, they made great. So when God says, I will make great your name, it is gadol, it's this verb right here that God is using, and make great, right? It's not that God's going to, it's not that God is saying that your name is already great to Abram and Sarah, or to David and so on, other people for whom God says that. But no, it's I will make great your name. Great. Okay, so you might be asking yourself, why in the world is this thing called the Piel? Or why was that other stem that we learned last time called the Nifal? Or why is the other stem that we're going to learn next time called the Hithpael? These all sound, or like Pual, right? These all sound actually kind of similar, don't they? Hithpael, Nifal, Pual. You'll notice that there's a P in there, and there's a L sound at the end of all of these. Hithpael, Nifal, Pual, right? Hofal, Hithpael. Well, that's because these are all these names, Piel, Pual, Hofal, Nifal, Hithpael, these are all built off of one root, the root Paal. Now, you might be asking yourself, that's a weird one to build on because it's actually a weak verb, right? It's got a guttural in the middle, so it's actually not the best form to build on. But this is what medieval Jewish scholars used as their base root to name all of their different stems of verbs. They weren't really named before that. That is to say, people just spoke Hebrew. They knew how to do it, and not many people actually tried to even learn how to speak in Hebrew or write in Hebrew. There were a few early Christians like Jerome and Macrina and other people who tried to translate the New Testament from the Old Testament from Hebrew into Latin. So some people did try to kind of study Hebrew, but it was apparently very hard, as you well know. But also, there weren't a lot of there weren't grammars written. There weren't like treatments of it written. You just kind of had to hear a lot of people speak Hebrew for a long time and read with them, and they would try to show you some stuff. When Jews tried to create kind of a system for understanding Hebrew, they used this base root, Pual, which means like to do something, to make something. And then they put it in these different forms, and then they just spoke it out loud, and that became the name of the form. So Pual in the Piel is Piel, right? It can't have that dagesh, that doubling of the middle radical, so it just disappears, right? Because you can't put a dagesh inside a guttural. They can't get doubled. It's already hard enough to make that sound once. You can't make it twice in a row, right? So it's Piel. That's the name of the form. The name of the stem, Piel, comes from this verb, Pual, this root that means to make or do something, that is put into this particular pattern. So Piel. So one of the benefits of knowing the names of the stems is that you can even kind of sound them out. So remember Nifal? That was exactly the same thing, Nifal. It was like the Nifal perfect form of this verb Pual. So you add a noon to the front of it. Nifal. Now you can even guess. We haven't even gotten there yet, but try to guess. Hithpael. What's going to be distinctive about the next stem we learned, the Hithpael? It's going to have a hey in front of it because that's the name, Hithpael. Today we're going to learn one called the Hithpael. Hithpael. Guess what it has stuck on the front of it? That's right, a hit. The sound hit, hey, hirek, tav, is going to be stuck on the front of this root, and that makes Hithpael. So the nice thing about knowing the names of the patterns or the stems in this way is that you actually hear what it sounds like with this, as long as you know that the root that you're listening for is pei, ayin, lamed, Pual. So Hithpael, Nifal, right, Piel, Hithpael. This is describing the perfect version of these verbs, third masculine singular, and just whatever it sounds like. So we're gonna talk a little bit here. I'm gonna review a little bit here. This is our call active participles. Remember, for our root katal, our basic root, we had kotel as our masculine singular pattern. Remember, our distinctive sign for our call active participle was our holum over our first radical, or sometimes a holum vav just after it. That's a distinctive form. You can hang your hat on that. Having a holum after your first radical, if you know you're looking at a verb, having a holum over your first radical or a holum vav right after it, you're looking at a call active participle. So kotel, kotelim, kotelet, kotelot. Remember, we have our noun endings that are added to it. Piel participles, remember the Piel exists in all these different patterns. We just did perfect. We just talked about the perfect form, right? The perfect form, remember, you double the middle radical and you have an I-class vowel underneath your first radical. Now we're going to talk about participles, right? Then the Piel participle, so Piel shows up as participles just like the call does, just like the Nifal does. And here we have our root gadal, which shows up often in the Piel. That's why I'm using this as the example, because it actually does show up a lot in the Piel in the Bible. And if you want to see gadal as a participle, then you would add a meme to the front of it with a schwa underneath it. And then you would have that doubling of the middle radical. So notice that we have a doubling of the middle radical. That's going to be distinctive for our Piel forms. And notice that we have this meme with a schwa in front of it. Now this is going to be important because with the call active participle, you didn't add anything to the front of it. But for other participles, in other stems, we are going to add this meme to the front of the verb. So if you see a root with a meme stuck on the front of it, it could be a noun. That happens in Hebrew. But it could be a participle. And a meme with a schwa underneath it, now that is a Piel participle. So mugadel, that masculine singular one in the top left, that would be one who makes great or makes large, one who enlarges. All those would be fine meanings of this, and of course you wouldn't know the meaning really until you see it in a sentence. But top right, the masculine plural one, megadalim, would be ones who make great, or bottom right, megadalot, ones who make great, and they're marked grammatically as feminine, the subjects of whatever that is, whoever it is or whatever it is that's making something great. Okay, so this meme prefix, meme with a schwa underneath it, the prefix is characteristic of the Piel participle. We're going to come back to this next time when we talk about the Hithpael, but also that schwa underneath. Keep that in mind because we are going to actually think about that when we talk about the imperfect form of the Piel. Okay, so I'll just show you some, the Piel participle can show up in strong forms, which we just looked at right there. It can also show up in some weak forms. So I'll just show you, here's our little paradigm here. So for our root katal, just like we use our paradigmatic root katal a lot, you can see this, it's a strong root, that's why we use that. You can see it. So instead of kotel as our masculine singular participle for the call active participle, here we have makatel. And notice we have a doubling of the middle radical, and we have a ma prefix, a meme and a schwa prefix. That's our sign for the Piel participle. Notice we also have noun endings that mark gender and number, im, et, and ot for our masculine plural, feminine singular and feminine plural forms. Another root that we can do, this is a middle weak form. This is an aleph, right? Middle guttural. So this is going to mess us up because it cannot take a dagesh. So we're not going to have that distinctive dagesh. We still have a meme and a schwa underneath it. This form here, ma'an, you're not going to memorize this. Don't worry about this. I'm not going to ask you on a quiz about this, but you will encounter these in the Bible. You're going to come across Piel forms that don't have the doubling of the middle radical because they can't have that, right? Because they're gutturals. So you just got to watch out for it. You can see that if, let's say that form on the bottom right there, as far as we've gone so far, mama'anot, that ot ending, that's a noun ending. Then you have a meme with a schwa underneath it. This could be a noun. But you look and you got three good letters there in the middle, three good consonants. You have a meme, an aleph, and a nun. You can look it up and you can see, like the BDB will tell you what the Piel forms look like and so on. But you can also just look at it and say, okay, I got a meme with a schwa underneath it. That's probably a Piel participle. And then I've got this noun ending ot, that's feminine plural. So you can look up that root ma'an, see what it means, and then try to see what would it mean. What would it do if I put this in the Piel participle? And by the way, it'll tell you what it means. So mahar, again, this middle guttural, this hey in the middle, it's going to mess you up a little bit. I'm not going to quiz you on this. I'm not going to ask you about this in the final. You don't have to worry. But just know, we will get to this in the last week of class, by the way. But you're not gonna win or lose your final based on this, right? This is not the crucial thing to learn. Learn these strong roots, like that one on top there. Learn that strong root, and that's going to be important for you. But these other ones are just to help you kind of recognize them. So this form here, shalach, notice it's a third hey. It's going to mess up your vowels a little bit, but not too bad. And you got the doubling of the middle radical. If your lamed is a middle radical, great, because you can see that dagesh all the way through, right? And your meme with a schwa underneath it on the front. You got your noun endings, even if they're messed up a little bit by that third hey, but you're okay. A third aleph is going to mess you up a little bit too with your vowels, but still this verb here, malah, which means to be filled or to fill something up. So in the Piel, to be filled. To fill up, basically. And you can see this meme with a schwa underneath it, and then you're doubling in the middle radical. You're good. Gala, like a third hey, sometimes those lose their endings, but you don't have to worry about that because I'm not going to quiz you on that. But you will run across these weak forms in the Bible. We'll talk about third heys the last couple weeks of class, and we'll spend a little bit more time. I'm just showing you these to kind of, give you a sense of what you're going to come across in the wild in the Bible. Yeled, right? This is that one it means to bear a child, or yeled can mean a young child. But here, this verb, right? You can see there's a yod in the front here, and yods are often weak, but that's actually here strong. Like it doesn't collapse when you add something to it, which is really nice. It's an interesting part of the Piel participle form. But you can notice that all of these have this meme with a schwa and a doubling of the middle radical, as long as it's not a guttural, and you're good. Those are your signs. So the thing that's important here is to learn how to hang your hat. Learn how to say, okay, I know that these are the distinctive signs. You don't need to memorize every form. Memorize the distinctive signs. Just like the distinctive sign of the Piel perfect is a doubling of the middle radical and an I-class vowel under your first your first letter of your root, the first root of your word, and the perfect endings. Here, You've got that main with a schwa underneath it and a doubling of the middle radical. Those are your signs to hang your hat on for the Piel participle. See? Characteristic features. There you go right there. We also need to learn the imperfect, which, thank goodness, has the exact same forms as the Hithpael imperfect, and the exact same forms, these preformatives and subformatives, or the way that these different it's marked for gender and number. It's exactly the same as the call as well in terms of these prefixes and suffixes. Notice those, yeah? So we've got the same yod, which means third person. We have the u, which means masculine plural. We have the na, which means feminine plural at the end. The tavs, which are third feminine or all the second person forms. The first aleph and the first common plural noon and on the beginning. Great, same exact things that we've been used to with the call and with the Hithpael. So here is our Piel imperfect of our strong root. We're just going to use katal here as our paradigmatic root, but you can see the 3ms form, yukatel. If you just think of katal being your root, you can see katal in every single one of these different inflections, or how it's made specifically to fit with a particular gender and number, so 3ms, 2fs, etc. You can see every single one of these different options has the whole root katal. You can see also that all of them have the distinctive Piel doubling of the middle radical. And you can also see that there are the distinctive imperfect prefixes and suffixes, or performatives and subformatives. And you can see that underneath every single one of these preformatives, the yod for the third masculine singular and plural, the tav for the third feminine singular, and the tav also for all the second person forms, and the aleph and the noon. You can see that for all of these forms, right, underneath the performative there is a schwa. Notice that schwa underneath all of your performatives. Remember, under the maim, for a Piel participle, we added a maim with a schwa underneath it as our marker of the Piel participle. Well, check this out. This is our marker of the Piel imperfect, is our schwa underneath our imperfect preformative. So the imperfect is the same, but the performative is the same for the imperfect for the call and the Hithpael and the Piel, and it'll be the same for the others too. You're going to add those letters, the yod, the tav, the noon, the aleph, etc., in front of your root, right? But what's underneath those performatives is going to be distinctive as well. So remember, for the call, we had our hirek underneath our performative. For the Hithpael, we had that Hithpael triangle. Remember, hirek and then dagesh and then kametz. Well, for our Piel imperfects, we have a schwa underneath our performative. And notice that that's just like what's underneath our main performative for our participles in the Piel. So, yukatel, takatel, takatel, takatali, ekatel. What's different is that schwa vowel underneath our performative and our doubling of the middle radical. And also you can say that a vowel, that patak, that short a vowel underneath our first radical, that is actually distinctive. If you remember our call imperfect forms, we had like yiktol, niktol, tiktol. There was a schwa underneath our first radical of our root. So in the Piel, we have those other forms. By the way, I'll just keep it here just for a second for you to see and just notice that before we move on. So yukatel, tukatel, a schwa underneath our performative, that's going to tell you that it is a Piel, a doubling of the middle radical. All right. Now, remember the imperative. We form the imperative by taking our second person imperfect form, and then we strike the performative. And what you're left with is the imperative. I'm going to back up a second to the previous slide and just show you one more time. Our second person forms tukatel, tukatali, tukatalu, tukatelna. Those are our second person forms. And so instead of tukatel, it'll just be katel. And instead of tukatali for second feminine singular, an imperative would be katali. And that's exactly what we get. We get this a short A-class vowel under our first letter of our root, our first root letter, and we get these imperfect endings, I, U, Na. But what's distinctive as well is that Piel, doubling of the middle radical. Look at our doubling of the middle radical there. Boom, we've got our doubled, in this case, tet. So just to say, the Piel's got this imperative form as well. So if I wanted to tell someone to enlarge something, right? I could say gadel, and if I had doubled the middle radical, gadal is the root that means to be large, to be great. If I wanted to say enlarge that thing over there, enlarge the house, make the house bigger, or make the name bigger. And if I wanted to order someone around to do that, I would say gadel. My root gadal in the call means to be large. In the Piel, it means to make large. In the imperative form, gadel, it would be make large, a command to someone, right? So notice that we have our doubled middle radical. All right, and our infinitives follow that exact same form, just like with the call and the nifal. The nifal was a bit different with that strange hey beginning, but our infinitives are built off of our imperative form. So just to back it up a second, here's our imperative form, katel, or if I had this with gadal as my root, it would be gadel, and here we have gadel. Right? That's exactly the same thing. That's exactly the same form. If I wanted to use katal as my example here, it would be katel. It would be the exact same thing as the imperative. Now, how would you ever know if it's an infinitive or an imperative? Well, if it has something added to the front of it, like a preposition stuck onto the front of this verb, and if it has an object suffix stuck onto the end of it, then I'm looking at an infinitive construct. So the infinitive absolute is always a little bit harder to see. You might just kind of have to do a double take and say, is that an infinitive or an imperative? But one of those two is going to make a lot more sense in your sentence than the other one will. But this is our basic form. So gadel or katel. So that is our Piel infinitive form. Here's a little summary of the Piel here. I've put all the different options here together just so you can see them all at once. Notice that all of these different forms have a doubled middle radical. Here's our perfect and our imperfect on top, our participle and imperative in the middle, our infinitive construct and infinitive absolute underneath. Notice with our perfect and our imperfect form, kitel and yakatel, we've got the double middle radical. In the imperfect form, notice our schwa underneath our performative. And then notice that same schwa is underneath the main that is really a performative for a participle. So the Piel has that schwa underneath the performatives. Notice that our imperative is built off of our imperfect. Just take away the prefix for the imperfect and you're left with that same exact imperative form. So yakatel and then katel. The infinitive construct and infinitive absolute are exactly the same as the imperative. Boom. Really, you've got to learn the perfect and the imperfect. There's just the markers of it, right? The perfect and imperfect markers. Imperfect has a hirek underneath the first radical and a double middle radical. The imperfect has a schwa underneath the preformative and a double middle radical. The participle has a main as a prefix and then a schwa underneath that prefix. The imperative has a double middle radical, katel. Infinitive construct and infinitive absolute are exactly the same form. So the ones that are really distinctive are the perfect, the imperfect, and then your third form is the imperative, infinitive absolute, and infinitive construct, all those together. They're all the same thing. They're all built off of that imperfect. So I'll say, I know that this is confusing. I know that this is too much information. However, it is possible to memorize the distinctive elements of the Piel in a relatively short amount of time, and then try to pick those out as you come across them in the translation, let's say. So that's the Piel. That's at least as much as we're going to have time for it in this class. But you will have a lot of time to confer with the Piel in your translation. Also, if you look over the chapter 19 in the Kutz and Josberger textbook, there's a bit more information there. But we're going to turn to the Pual, which is the passive or reflexive of the Piel. Remember, this is less than 1% of verbs in the entire Hebrew Bible. This is a very small subset of verbs, but it also is based on the Piel, but with that same distinctive passive U sound that we saw in the call passive participle. So remember, barak means to bless. Baruch means one who has been blessed, or a blessed one. And then like katav means to write. Ketuvim, that's a passive participle. It's a call passive participle, and that it's got a u in there. Ketuvim, and that means the things that have been written, the ones that have been written, or the writings. So remember that u in there tells us it's passive. Well, guess what? That passive u is going to be very important for us to remember with the Pual here. So here's a couple of different examples in the Piel, and then those same exact examples in the Pual. So things can show up in the Pual perfect, in the Pual imperfect, in the Pual participle, in Pual imperatives or infinitive constructs. I mean, those are really rare because it's a strange thing, and they tend to be a few distinctive roots that get put into this pattern. But in any event, here's some examples here. So chavar, which is to join, like so. Hivar, this is our Piel perfect, third masculine singular. How would I recognize that? Because it's got just the 3 letters. I've just got my root, so it's third masculine singular. And then I've got a doubling of the middle radical, and I've got an I-class vowel under my first radical. Okay, so that's Piel perfect, third masculine singular. He joined. Underneath that, we've got the root kafar, which is like Yom Kippur, right? That's like the day, right? Yom means day, and Kippur means atonement. Kafar means really to cover something, but in the Piel it can mean to like make something be covered. Translated here, expiated, or like to get rid of sin, like to cover over sin with blood, right? That's it's kind of the idea of the mercy seat. Really is the Kippur, the covering seat. In the temple. But anyway, I'll just say here, this kiper is he expiated, or he got rid of sin. He covered over the sin. Again, there's no ending. It's a zip ending. So it's third masculine singular. We have an I-class vowel underneath our first radical. We have a doubled middle radical. Those are the signs of the Piel perfect. If I wanted to put this in the Pual perfect and say not he covered over the sin, but the sin was covered over, right? That's the second example on the right, on the bottom. So kupar. Notice I've got my oo there. I still have that doubling of the middle radical. That's the sign of the Piel, but then I have this oo instead of an ih. That oo is the sign it's a passive. So passive plus double middle radical, boom, we got the Pual. That's what it is. It was covered over. Or that first example, he joined 2 things together. If I just want to say like it was joined, like hey, this plank was joined to this other plank when I showed up. I didn't nail those things together. They were already joined, right? So chubar, right? It was all joined together. Chubar is the Pual because it's got that doubled middle radical, just like you expect with the Piel, but it also has this U vowel in there. Again, this is less than 1% of verbs in the Bible. But when you see these U's stuck into roots that you might recognize, that's a sign that it's in the passive. And if it's got a double middle radical as well then you're looking at the Piel passive, or the name for that is the Pual. So notice how Pual, right? Those are the vowels that you see on the right there. U, ah, Pual, chubar, kupar, Pual. Yeah? So the name of that particular verbal pattern is supposed to make you remember those vowels that are distinctive for it. So sometimes just say the vowels that you see out loud, and replace the 3 root letters with pe, ayin, and lamed, and you might be able to like discern what root you're looking at if you're not what pattern, what stem you're looking at if you're not actually sure which one it is, right? You can sound it out. This would be Pual. Pual. That's it. It's a passive of the Piel. So there's your distinctive markers there. An oo under your first radical and a double middle radical. That's the perfect, right? That's for the Pual perfect. Here's the paradigm for it. You don't have to memorize this, but just look at what's shared by all these things. A double middle radical and an oo underneath your first radical. And your zipatatati temtenu endings. Doubling of the middle radical. U underneath your first radical, and your zipatatatu temtenu perfect endings. That's all you need to know. Remember the Piel? This is the Piel imperfect. You have a schwa underneath your performative. You have your double middle radical. I told you that the A-class vowel underneath your first root letter. Your root consonant is it's distinctive for the PL. It's a little bit harder to remember that. It's okay if you don't. That's not as important as the double middle radical and the schwa underneath your performative. But here's the Pual imperfect. Notice it's pretty much the same thing. You got double middle radical. You've got your schwa underneath your performative. What's characteristic of it is that you have this oo underneath your first radical, just like you did for the Pual perfect. So yaku tail, or tukutal, or tukutal, or tukutali, or ekutal. Those are all that's your Pual, right? You got those vowels there that are part of the name of the very stem itself. So you don't have to worry about this. Remember, I'm not gonna this is not gonna be on the quiz at the end of the week, right? How do you can you parse a Pual? The PL you should try to work on, but you will see these in the Bible. Every once in a while, you'll run across them. And just so you know what they basically are, that's the point of this. Schwa underneath your performative, just like for the PL, the double middle radical. And then the distinctive thing of the Pual is that it's got this oo vowel underneath your first radical. I'm going to back up there. I went a little too fast past that. There's like the PL, the Pual has a doubling of the middle radical and a schwa under the performative. But what makes it distinctive as a Pual instead of a PL is that it's got this oo underneath the first radical, and that's what's going to make it passive. So instead of, he will make great, he will enlarge, instead of that, if this was Yagudal in the third masculine singular, this instead of Yagudal, this would be instead of that meaning he will enlarge or make great, it would then be he will be enlarged, right? Or maybe he will enlarge himself, right? So all to say, this is again a rare kind of thing, but it's a really interesting nuance that Hebrew can make just in their verbs themselves. And can be hugely important for the theological meaning of a passage as well. Who is the one who's making great? Is it God? Is it Abraham? Right? So remember, our PL participles had a meme and a schwa stuck on the front. And then we also had that characteristic doubling of the middle radical. Another sign would be the short A-class vowel under our first radical of our root, but that's okay if you don't remember that. Just try to hold the most important thing is the meme with the schwa and then the doubling. But so notice that there you can see all these different forms, masculine, singular, feminine, singular. This is the same thing that you get with all participles, right? They have these noun endings. Now for the Pual, what do you got? You still have your meme with your schwa, but then you have an oo that comes after it, right? And this doubling of the middle radical as well. Just like the PL, you got your doubling of the middle radical, and you've got your meme with the schwa stuck on the front. But now you have this long U vowel underneath your first radical, and that's what tells you it's passive instead of active. That's the Pual instead of the PL. Again, here's our chart of our verbs. Now we've talked about the call and the nifal in great detail. We have talked about the PL, and now I've given you a very brief overview of the Pual. That respects the importance of the Pual for the Bible. It is not terribly important in the grand scheme of things, but for a certain passage you're translating, it could be incredibly important. So it's worth us treating it. But just remember where this is in the grammar and stick a little marker there. And then if you ever run into a Pual and you're like, what does that do again? Come back to that part of your Hebrew grammar, of your Kutz and Josberger grammar. But remember the Hithpael. I said it's kind of this like weird combination of like the PL and then like something else. I've got here a line going to Hithpael. You can even hear me when I say Hithpael. There's like a hey there, like a huh. The Hithpael has a hit on the front of it, and then it also has a double middle radical, like the PL. It's actually kind of like it's like a strange version of the PL. It actually has no relation to the Hithpael. So I'm just kind of drew that way to make like a little house. But even as I'm saying that, it's not terribly helpful. Just imagine in your head a line to the PL from the Hithpael. But it's like kind of like the Pual in this weird way. It's this. What it actually is a very ancient form of a verb that died out long before the Hebrew Bible was written, except in this one form, kind of like the call passive participle. So when you're reading these Hithpael verbs, you're reading these kind of primordial, ancient forms of verbs that still hung on in Mesopotamia, but that died out in Canaan and in Hebrew, but except in this one form. It's kind of like this, a zombie form of a verb. But it's amazing. Look at this. It looks ridiculous. It looks unbelievable. If you have way too many letters, but you can recognize like some verbal endings here, you know what I mean? Like you got zipa tatati u ten new endings. You got your perfect endings, but you're like, what in the world? There's way too many letters here. You're probably looking at a Hithpael, because check this out. You got your root there, right? You got the root katal, that root that we use all the time. But look at what you've got on the front. You've got a hit, right? Sorry, I accidentally moved ahead there. You got a hit. Notice your hit here. Do you see the third masculine singular form? Hithpael, or underneath, Hithpatela for the third feminine singular, or the second masculine singular. Hithkatal. So many letters there. But just take a look at what you've got in your middle radical of every single one of these forms. You have a doubled middle radical. You have a dagesh inside your tet. If your root is kof tet lamed and you have a doubled middle radical, oh, I'm looking at a Piel, right? Well, not so fast, because you got a hit stuck onto the front of your verb, right? So that hit is going to change what it means. I'm going to show you the kind of forms here, and then I'll explain what it means in just a moment. But just for now, notice this form, a hit. You got a hit stuck on to a root that you know, and then perfect endings. You're looking at a Hithpael perfect. Do you see that hit on the front? It gets kind of weird when you put it in the imperfect, because you can make this, in English, kind of the equivalent of a future tense, right? Or, action that has not completed yet, incomplete action. But so, like yit katel in the third masculine singular, right? Look at that, yit katel. You have a yit, and then a tit, and then at the very bottom, first common singular, et. Or first common singular, look at that. First common plural. Oh, sorry, it says singular on the right. That's my mistake. But the first common plural on the bottom right, nit. So notice that you have these distinctive markers of the imperfect, but then you have a tav that follows them. Do you see that? And then you have your root, and then you have the imperfect endings that you're used to, like the third masculine plural. I'm sorry, it says third masculine singular up there. I'll change that for the final form of this that I put online, but third masculine plural up in the top right-hand corner. Yit katalu. You have your u ending, your masculine plural ending. Or underneath that, titkatel na. You have your na ending, which you're used to for the imperfect. But you also have this tav beginning, which that works with the tav beginning and the na ending. That's your imperfect form, right? But you've got a root there, a full root, katel, and then you have this extra letter, an extra tav. If you've got an extra tav hanging out in your word, you're looking at a form of the Hithpael. And you also have double middle radicals for all of these, right? Double middle radical and an extra tav hanging out there. You're looking at a Hithpael imperfect. If you have an extra hit, like a full hit on the front, then you're looking at the perfect form. I'm going to back up for a minute, just show you this perfect form again. Hithkatel, Hithkatala, Hithkatalta, Hithkatalt, Hithkatalti, right? That's our, third masculine singular to first common singular pattern. You can see those zipatatati endings. For the imperfect, you have your imperfect performatives and your suffomatives, or your endings, like third masculine plural u ending and na ending and so on. You've got all those forms, right? So this is the Hithpael. This is how it looks, right? You got an infixed tav, this tav that got stuck in the middle there. For the participles, believe it or not, you got mit, right? You know how Piel has a meme stuck onto the front of participles? Well, Hithpael didn't want to get left out of that party. It's related to the Piel, so it's got to have that meme stuck on the front there. And it's got that schwa, but the schwa is underneath the tav, right? So it's mit. So if you ever see a mit stuck onto a root that you know, you're looking at a Hithpael participle. Mit equals Hithpael participle. I've got it there marked in red. It's got our noun endings, eem and ot, right, that we're used to. This sounds really confusing, but Hithpael is actually one of the easiest things to recognize in the wild, because it's got way too many letters, and it's got that distinctive it, right? An it sound stuck into the middle or onto the front of your verb that you know. Okay, so the Piel, the Pual, the Hithpael, they're all related, and that's all I'm going to teach about the Hithpael. I mean, Hithpael obviously exists in all the forms. There's imperatives, there's participles that I just showed you, but there's also infinitive constructs and so on. Infinitive constructs and imperatives are formed exactly the same way in the Hithpael as they are formed in all other forms of verbs in Hebrew. That is, you take the second person imperfect form and you cut off the performative, and you're stuck with what's left behind is the imperative and the infinitive construct and absolute. Again, the Hithpael, you're going to run across verbs in the Hithpael. That's a lot more common than the Pual. So it's important to know, but it's okay if you come out of this class saying, I am a bit unclear about the Hithpael. Everyone always is. It's one of those things that you'll just get used to as you translate more Hebrew, and all that can help with that is just more and more translation. I know that this is too much, but I also want to say that you all are doing an amazing job in a very difficult semester, in very difficult circumstances and difficult times, and I am so proud of each and every one of you. Everyone is dealing with not only a pandemic and all of this turmoil that we are going through. People are dealing with all kinds of stuff individually too. On top of that, we're all in an online format, which is difficult and presents difficulties in and of itself. We are all dealing with issues of time and energy, and the daylight is fading as we get towards December. Things are difficult. However, you all are doing an amazing job learning a difficult ancient language, and you have made incredible progress. You might feel like you're not good enough for this, but I swear that you are doing an amazing job. Continue to work hard, and you will see the reward at the end. May blessings be with you.